Even if you don't know everything about everyone you take a photo with, most people can be pretty confident that they've never taken a photo with someone who has claimed the lives of multiple people. But when these criminals look and act like everyone else, it's not surprising for them to appear in photographs with people who had no idea what they were capable of. Number 5. It was the summer of 1975 when two young people recently graduated from university and were found to have lost their lives while on a picnic near the swimming hole of Mills Creek in Washington state. Police had numerous theories about who could have committed the crimes and why. Everything from a robbery gone wrong to a professional hit was considered. But for 25 years, the person who took the lives of Patrick Oliver and Susan Savage would go unidentified. As news of the crime made headlines, Linda Brewer was getting to know the man she would later marry. Linda was the daughter of a prison guard at Washington State Penitentiary and had recently started dating Robert Yates, who worked as a correctional officer there. Yates came from a middle-class, deeply religious family and had aspirations of joining the army. Linda and Yates were married in 1976, though they'd been together for some years at this point. Yates had previously been married to another woman, and he and Linda had a wedding ceremony even though he hadn't yet finalized the divorce with his first wife. Linda's marriage was far from perfect. Before they were even officially married, there were some alarm bells. Yates had quit his job at the prison for no reason, and Linda's family were concerned about his sporadic behavior. Then Linda found out he had drilled holes in the attic so that he could spy on their neighbors. They briefly broke up, but Linda came back to him and they were officially married. A year later, Yates enlisted in the army. He was stationed abroad numerous times, but still spent enough time at home to build a family. Between 1974 and 1989, Linda gave birth to 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. The Yateses were generally a loving but strict parent and partner. Linda had picked up on some more strange behavior, like the fact that he changed his moods very quickly and wore cologne to go hunting, but didn't think much of it. At the same time, a number of prostitutes had their lives taken. The local law enforcement were stumped as to who could have committed the crimes. All passed away for the same reasons and were found with plastic bags over their heads. The case was almost abandoned due to a lack of funding, and the general public not caring about the women who were targeted. But the families of the victims pushed for the investigation to continue. Eventually, police came across a lead when a witness saw one of the victims in a Corvette. It was the last time he saw the victim alive. Police went through a list of all the Corvette owners in the state and came across one that had been recently sold. When they checked out the vehicle, they found DNA that matched the victim's and fibers from her clothing. Tracing the car's previous owner took them to Yates. It was early in the morning when Linda and her children were awoken by police who'd come to search the house. Yates was arrested and DNA and fingerprint samples matched those left on the bodies of the victims. Yates would eventually confess to taking the lives of 16 people, including the 2 students he had attacked before he married Linda. One of the bodies was found buried in their back garden, just a few meters away from where Linda slept every night. Number 4. Even in the early days of photography, it seemed people were already unknowingly taking photos with serial killers. This possibly includes the most infamous unidentified criminal of them all. When Maud Marsh met George Chapman in 1901, she was 18 years old. He was in his mid-30s and owned a pub where she was applying to work as a barmaid. Her mother came with her to the interview and was concerned when Chapman insisted her daughter would have to live at the pub if she wanted a job there. Chapman reassured her as he rented out a number of rooms above the pub, and Maud went to work for him. Almost immediately, Chapman tried to seduce Maud, but she insisted they would have to be married before she would sleep with him. This was a problem for Chapman, but he eventually gave in and had a small wedding ceremony, in which not even Maud's family was invited. Maud's family were increasingly distrustful of Chapman, but their daughter seemed happy. That was until the summer of 1902, when Maud fell mysteriously ill. Her family took her to the nearby hospital, against Chapman's wishes. He claimed not to trust them, but for 4 weeks, she was an inpatient and she seemed to get better. Not long after she returned home, she seemed to fall ill again. Chapman meticulously prepared all of her food and drinks, but it didn't seem to help. One night, Maud's mother drank from her daughter's glass and also vomited. Now she was certain that something in her food was causing the illness, but before she could ask a doctor about it, Maud passed away. The Marsh family requested an autopsy, and it was determined Maud had been poisoned over a lengthy period of time. Police immediately suspected Chapman, and soon his web of lies came crashing down. Chapman's name wasn't actually George Chapman. His real name was Seweryn Kleczowski. He was a Polish immigrant and had trained as a minor surgeon before coming to London. In 1889, he'd married a woman named Lucy. They'd broken up a few years later, as Kleczowski had threatened to take her life while she was heavily pregnant. They hadn't divorced though, so Kleczowski's marriage to Maud hadn't even been legal. Neither had his marriage to Mary Spink. Kleczowski, who was now going by the name of Chapman, had met Mary in the mid-1890s, and they were seen kissing by their landlady. They began telling everyone they were married. They too had a happy marriage, but that all came to an end when Mary suffered from the same mysterious illness. She would be his first confirmed victim. His second was a woman named Bessie Taylor, who he also convinced people he had married. She was also poisoned in the same way as Mary and the same way as Maud would be. After Maud's passing, Kleczowski would finally be captured. Upon hearing the news, Inspector Frederick Aberlin, who wasn't even involved in the case, remarked that they'd caught the Ripper at last. Aberlin had headed the investigation into the Jack the Ripper crimes, and Kleczowski had been one of the early suspects. His surgical skills and the fact that he'd lived close to where the bodies were found made him a suspect. He was ruled out at the time, but after he was proven to be a killer, Aberlin was sure they'd found the notorious criminal. Number 3. It had been several years since Anna Batalina had seen her old school friend when she got in touch with Tamara Samsonova. The two had gone to school together, but that was many decades ago. The two women, now in their 60s, agreed to meet up, but something stopped Anna. She'd heard stories from Samsonova's neighbors. They suspected she'd taken the life of her mother-in-law, and Tamara had been acting very erratic. They all believed there was something wrong with this woman. Anna decided to miss the meeting. She would receive an angry phone call from her former friend where Samsonova threatened to cut her into pieces. It wasn't long after the missed meeting that Samsonova would be arrested for taking the life of Valentina Nikolaevna. Valentina was 79 years old when she passed away. She lived in an apartment not far from Samsonova, and when Samsonova's home was undergoing renovations, a mutual friend convinced Valentina to let Samsonova stay with her. Samsonova soon outstayed her welcome, and after a few months, Valentina asked her to leave. Getting rid of her new flatmate wouldn't be easy though, and the two got into many arguments. In July of 2015, Samsonova purchased prescription sleeping pills and mixed around 50 pills with Valentina's food. After Valentina passed out, Samsonova took her life and disposed of her body at a nearby pond. It didn't take long for police to identify Valentina, and when they discovered Samsonova still staying in her apartment, they immediately knew who was behind the crime. However, they would soon discover that this was much more than a disagreement over living arrangements. Samsonova had kept a diary with entries written in Russian, German, and English. Between normal entries, like had trouble sleeping and drank coffee, were detailed descriptions of other occasions where she had taken lives. 2 of her victims had previously rented a room from Samsonova before they disappeared. One was found in almost the exact same place where Valentina's body was found, but police hadn't been able to solve who had taken his life. In some ways, it looks like Samsonova had been trying to get caught. As well as her violent outburst to Anna, she'd also bragged about crimes to other people who didn't believe her. One of her suspected victims is her own husband, who disappeared in 2000. His body was never found. When he initially vanished, Samsonova contacted police to file a missing persons report. In 2015, perhaps disappointed that police hadn't been trying to solve her crime, she went back and urged for something to be done. It seemed like a strange act for someone who may have gotten away with taking her husband's life for 15 years. Number 2. In the 1950s, Perth, Australia was a relatively safe community where people didn't feel the need to even lock their doors at night, or even when they traveled away from home for longer periods of time. That changed almost overnight when, starting in 1959, a series of violent crimes left many families asking if they would be next. At first, residents and police didn't realize there was a serial killer among them. The crimes all varied, with different weapons and apparent motivations. In 2 cases, the boyfriends of the victims were charged with their deaths, but the cases couldn't be connected to any others, and it was assumed that there were a number of criminals lurking around the city. One of the victims had their life taken moments after answering the door to an unidentified visitor late at night. The crime resulted in Perth residents not opening their doors after dark anymore. Sarah Sally Cook was a mother of 7, trying to shield her children from the horrors that were going on in the city around them. Little did she know that the horrors originated much closer to home. Sally was married to a man named Eric Edgar Cook. Cook had grown up in an abusive home and began a life of crime at a very young age. He had tried to join the army, but was discharged after it was found he had a juvenile record. He would often steal cars and was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor for one such crime. At home, his eldest daughter would remember him as a doting father. But his brother knew he had a dark side, and he could be very unpredictable, violent, and cruel. Police eventually figured out that some of the crimes were connected to one another. At one crime scene, they found fingerprints and were able to identify the type of weapon that had been used to take the victim's life. Thousands of men were fingerprinted to try to find a match, but the criminal remained elusive. Police also tested thousands of weapons, but none matched the one that had been used in the crime. It was only by chance that the weapon was ever found. An elderly woman out on a walk knelt down to pick a flower. From this vantage point, she spotted the weapon under a bush. When police tested it, they realized it was the weapon they were looking for. They placed the weapon back under the bush as they thought the criminal would come back to collect it. They were right, and when Eric Cook reached down to claim the weapon, police swooped in. Cook would confess to taking the lives of 8 people and 22 other violent crimes. Many who knew him couldn't believe it. Even though Sally saw her husband had a temper and a criminal record, she was shocked he was responsible for so much fear. She refused to help his defense team, and after her husband was convicted, would help overturn the conviction of another man who'd been imprisoned for one of Cook's crimes. Number 1. Sonia Sutcliffe thought she knew her husband better than anybody. She probably did, but even she was unaware of the dark secret he'd kept from the world until 1981. February of 1967, 10 years before anybody would ever hear the phrase Yorkshire Ripper, Sonia Suma and her older sister visited a pub in Bradford. They were the daughters of refugees, and their father was a cultured man who'd encouraged his children to watch opera and learn the piano. Sonia and her sister had told him they were going to watch the ballet before going to the pub, where Sonia met Peter Sutcliffe. Sutcliffe was 4 years her senior, but the two got on well and soon started dating. They would spend time at one another's homes, though Sutcliffe's family were never too fond of Sonia. Sonia had dreams of becoming a teacher and briefly went to study in London, but suffered a mental breakdown and eventually was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Sutcliffe supported Sonia and helped her manage her condition. The two were married in 1974 on the day of Sonia's 24th birthday. The following year, the Yorkshire Ripper's reign of terror would begin. The Ripper targeted prostitutes, but many women who were not involved with this kind of work were also attacked. They would be struck in the head, and many who survived the attacks were left with permanent mental disabilities as a result. The police received a lot of criticism because they didn't seem to be concerned that someone was taking the lives of prostitutes. They emphasized that the Ripper had killed innocent people, but only referred to those not involved in the sexual work. It's impossible to know how concerned Sonia Sutcliffe was by these attacks. She mostly spent her evenings at home and likely thought herself an unlikely victim of the mysterious criminal. As the Ripper continued to commit his crimes, police interviewed Sutcliffe many times. On one occasion, he was one of around 8,000 people who could have received a new £5 note that was found in the purse of one victim. But Sutcliffe had been hosting a party the night that she had passed away. On other occasions, Sonia gave her husband an alibi, even though she had no idea where he would disappear to late at night, sometimes for hours at a time. Finally, on January 2nd, 1981, Sutcliffe was stopped with a known prostitute in his car. Police initially let him go, only to discover he had hidden weapons. After days of questioning, he was declared the Ripper. He confessed to the crimes and told police he'd been cleaning up the streets. He insisted that Sonia knew nothing of his crimes, and he went to great lengths to make sure he cleaned any evidence from his clothes before his wife could see. Even after the truth came out though, Sonia remained married to Sutcliffe and visited him often up until 1994. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button and don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with all of our videos. But I've been Ty Knots and I'll catch you guys next time.